Hello and welcome to Unacademy's Let's Crack UPSC CSC in English channel. I am Rajshekar Reddy, faculty for Current Affairs. To tell something about myself, I have been teaching for the past 7 years. I have cleared the civil service examination in 2014 and I am a graduate in computer science engineering from JNTU Hyderabad. Before starting today's lecture, I would like to tell you something about the Unacademy Learning app. Unacademy is India's largest and finest platform for online civil services education. You get a number of advantages by downloading and subscribing to the Unacademy Learning app. These include daily live classes wherein you can chat with your educator, engage in discussions, ask your doubts, and answer polls all while the class is going on. So you can do a number of activities during the class. You have access to structured courses on the Unacademy Learning app, which comprehensively deal with the syllabus. You have live tests and quizzes, and you have unlimited access to content on the Unacademy platform. India's best educators are teaching on the Unacademy platform, so you have access to the best possible civil services coaching on this platform. A number of different courses are available. So one of the courses is the current affairs course. So you have access to all these courses by downloading and subscribing to the Unacademy Learning app. You need to subscribe. As I've already told you, there are a number of options available for subscription. You can subscribe for 1 month, you can subscribe for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. The best option is the 24-month subscription, which gives you a 67% discount. You get an additional 10% discount if you use this code RRUPSC. So please use my code when you subscribe to the Unacademy Learning app. The transaction value, the final transaction value will be for 57,600 rupees. You can convert this transaction into no cost EMIs extending up to 24 months. So you have a number of advantages by subscribing to the Unacademy Learning app. So let us continue with our series. So this is class 3 in the series of lectures. The series is titled Top 200 Topics in Current Affairs for Civil Services Prelims 2020. This lecture will not just be useful for the prelims 2020 but also for 2021 prelims, because most of the topics are evergreen topics, so they can be asked any year. So in this lecture, I will be dealing with 6 topics. First is the National Air Quality Index. The other topic is Olympics, UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage, National List of Intangible Cultural Heritage, SpaceX. So SpaceX is a very prominent organization in the field of space research. They have attained something significant in the recent period. We will be discussing that issue, and we will also look at the GDP numbers of our country, and we will also look into the concept of recession. So these are the 6 topics which will be dealt in today's class. So if you have any doubts, you can ask your questions on the Telegram channel. I will mention the name of the Telegram channel in the last slide. So please follow me on Telegram, and please subscribe to the Unacademy Learning app and use my code RRUPSC. So let us start with the first topic. First topic is the National Air Quality Index. So this topic forms part of a very important topic for the civil services prelims examination, that is indexes. So there will be at least 1 or 2 questions in the civil services prelims examination on indexes. You can be asked several issues with respect to a particular index. So who releases a particular index? What are the parameters based on which a particular index is formulated? The best ranking country, the worst ranking country, and most importantly, what is India's rank? Some indexes, however, do not have any ranking system. They are different in nature. So one of such indexes is the National Air Quality Index. National Air Quality Index basically measures the level of air pollution in a city, and this has been developed by IIT Kanpur in 2014. So before starting the topic, I would like to tell something about air pollution. What is meant by air pollution? How severe is air pollution in India? And how do we measure air pollution? Air pollution is a vast topic, and we will confine our discussion only to the brief introduction on air pollution, and we will look at the National Air Quality Index. So air pollution basically refers to the presence of chemicals or particles in the air in significant concentrations that harm the health of humans, animals, and plants. So the presence of pollutants in the air. So these pollutants can be either gases, solid particles, or liquid particles. In significant concentrations, results in what is called air pollution. So air pollution refers to the presence of harmful pollutants in the air, and these harmful pollutants must be in significant concentrations. Apart from causing a lot of damage to the health of humans, animals, and plants, they can also destroy buildings. They can discolor the buildings, and they also have a number of associated issues. According to the World Health Organization, 9 out of 10 people breathe air containing high levels of pollutants. So, most of the countries have high levels of pollution. The World Health Organization says that 9 out of 10 people on this planet breathe air containing high levels of pollutants. India leads the world in pollution linked deaths, followed by China and Nigeria, according to the report published by Global Alliance on Health and Pollution. So, according to a latest report, this was published in the month of December 2019, and according to this report, as many as 12 lakh people die in our country because of pollution related causes. So, India has the highest number of deaths registered because of air pollution. So, you can see the seriousness of this problem in our country. Most of the polluted cities of the world are located in India. I think 13 of the 20 most polluted cities of the world are located in India. So, how is air pollution measured? So, we know the seriousness of the problem. So, but how do we know whether air pollution is severe in our area or not? So, there is an index which measures air pollution. Air quality is measured with the Air Quality Index. The National Air Quality Index, developed by IIT Kanpur, was launched in 2014 to disseminate information on air quality in easily understandable form for the general public. So many countries have actually launched air quality indexes. India decided to launch its own version of the National Air Quality Index, and they have done so in 2014. This index gives information to the general public on the quality of air in their locality. This index measures 8 pollutants. So this measurement is based on 8 pollutants. So this is very, very important for your exam. What are the pollutants that are measured by the National Air Quality Index? So particulate matter PM10, particulate matter 2.5. So dimensions here mentioned. So if the particulate matter size is 10 millimeters in diameter, then it is called PM10. If it is 2.5 millimeters in diameter, then it is PM2.5. Nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, ammonia, and lead. So there are 8 pollutants that are tracked by the National Air Quality Index: PM10, PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide. Ground level ozone is also a pollutant. Troposphere ozone is beneficial to human health, but ground level ozone is harmful to human health. Ammonia and lead. You can you must remember these 8 pollutants. They are very important for the examination. So on the basis of these 8 pollutants, the quality of air is classified into 6 categories. So the air quality is classified into 6 categories. So what are those categories? So good, satisfactory, moderately polluted, poor, very poor, and severe. So quality of air is placed in either of these 6 categories on the level of pollutants in the air. So good, satisfactory, moderately polluted, poor, very poor, and severe. So you can see the color codes. So the National Air Quality Index gives color codes. So good, satisfactory. So the value must be 0 to 50 if the quality of air is good. Then 51 to 100 satisfactory, 101 to 200 moderately polluted, 201 to 300 poor, 301 to 400 very poor, 401 to 500 severe. So this is a very important topic. So you just need to remember 2 points. So National Air Quality Index is developed by IIT Kanpur, and it measures 8 pollutants: PM 2.5, PM10, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, ground level ozone, ammonia, and lead. So these are the 8 pollutants that are measured. On the basis of these measurements, air quality is classified into 6 categories, that is good, satisfactory, moderate, poor, very poor, and severe. So I have given the image here. So there are various color codes that are given for various categories. What are the benefits that an individual gets by knowing about the quality of air? So knowing about the quality of air makes easier for people to know how bad the pollution in their area is, and which places they should avoid on that particular day. So they get information on the level of pollution in their locality, and they try to avoid those places. It is certain that awareness will go up with availability of a monitoring tool like this in the future. So this tool also increases the awareness on the extent of pollution in our country, and it also helps in better monitoring in the future. So these are the benefits that the National Air Quality Index gives to individuals or to the general public. However, this air quality index suffers from a severe limitation. I don't think this index is available for all the countries. So it actually is available for the important towns and cities. It should be made available for all the major towns and cities of our country. Then everyone can have information in the on air pollution in their locality. So this is about the air quality index. Just go through these images so that you will get detailed information. This is a very important topic. It has been asked in the previous papers. So in the mains examination of 2015, they have asked this question. Mumbai, Delhi and Kolkata are the three mega cities of the country. But the air pollution is much more serious problem in Delhi as compared to the other two. Why is this so? So why is the pollution in Delhi always a big issue? Though Mumbai and Kolkata all have the same population, so they are mega cities, but the pollution in Delhi is always in the news. So why? So if you know the answer, you can send the answer to me on Telegram. So I'll check the answers and I'll reply to you. So this is about the National Air Quality Index and related aspects. Then we will move on to the next topic, that is Olympics. So this is a very small topic. I have chosen this topic because there is an important point which many people forget. So usually there will be at least one question or two questions in the prelims examination on sports. Sports related questions will be asked, especially in the prelims examination. So one or two questions will be asked. So India's performance in prominent international events will be asked in the civil services prelims examination. So if there is an important international event that was held either last year or this year, you need to track that international event and the performance of Indians in that particular event. Olympics have been postponed. They were supposed to be held, I think, this month, but they have been postponed by 1 year. So we will be looking at some aspects which generally aspirants miss. So the International Olympics Committee has decided to postpone the Summer Olympics 2020 to 2021 in the backdrop of Corona pandemic. So in the backdrop of the Corona pandemic, the International Olympics Committee decided to postpone the Olympics. So they were supposed to be held in Tokyo. So they will be held in Tokyo, but they will be held next year. As of now, they have not cancelled the Olympics. They have just postponed it by 1 year. Who conducts the Olympics? So this is what you need to know. So the Olympics are conducted by the International Olympic Committee, which is a non-governmental sports organization based in Lausanne, Switzerland. So International Olympic Committee based in Lausanne, Switzerland. So you must know the headquarters of the IOC. So IOC is based in Lausanne, Switzerland. It is the authority responsible for conducting the Olympics. So they organize the Olympics, and they organize both the Summer Olympics as well as the Winter Olympics. So you need to remember this point. IOC is headquartered in Lausanne, Switzerland. And you must also know that Olympics have not been suspended or postponed till date. So this is the first time that Olympics have been postponed. So this is the first time that Olympics have been postponed. But on three earlier occasions, Olympics have been totally cancelled. So this marks only the fourth time since the modern Olympics were held in 1896 that the games have been drastically affected by outside forces. So this is the fourth time that the games have been affected by outside forces. The other three occasions were cancellations due to First World War and Second World War. So because of the First World War and Second World War, the earlier Olympics, that is the 1916 Olympics, 1940 Olympics and 1944 Olympics were altogether cancelled. But this is for the first time that Olympics have been postponed. So you may be asked a question in the prelims examination. This is the fourth time that Olympics have been cancelled in the history of Olympics. So that is a wrong statement. So this is the first time that it has been postponed and it has been cancelled three times. So what are the earlier? So this is the logo for the Olympics. You all know this. Berlin was supposed to host the Olympics in 1916. So the Winter Games began only in 1924. So Summer Olympics were the only games which were played between 1896 and 1924. So Berlin was supposed to host the 1916 Olympics, but they were cancelled because of the First World War. Tokyo and Sapporo, these both these cities are in Japan, were originally awarded the 1940 Winter and Summer Olympics, but the Japanese government pulled out of these Olympics after the Second World War broke out. So Tokyo and Sapporo, which were supposed to host the Olympics in 1940, were also cancelled. Cortina in Italy was stated to host the 1944 Winter Olympics and London the Summer Olympics. So in 1944, Cortina d'Ampezzo, I think that is how you need to pronounce. So Cortina d'Ampezzo of Italy and London, the United Kingdom, were supposed to host these games, but these games were also cancelled because of the Second World War. So 1916, 1940 and 1944 games were cancelled altogether, but this is for the first time that Olympics have been postponed. So this is a point which I wanted to tell you. Some of you might know this, but some of you might not have heard about this. So that is the reason why I have brought this topic. So then we will be moving on to the next topic. So this is a very important topic for your prelims examination. UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage. So this is a question which has been asked in the past, and there is a very good chance of this question being asked in the future. Recently, the government of India has released the national list of intangible cultural heritage. So this is a very important topic for this year's examination. So what is heritage? What is intangible cultural heritage and what is tangible cultural heritage? So you need to know the basic definitions of heritage, tangible cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage. So let us see the meanings of these words and we will proceed to the UNESCO intangible cultural heritage practices from the country later. So first, heritage is something that is handed down from the past as a tradition. So something that we inherit from our ancestors is called heritage. So this can be a monument, this can be an object, this can be a tradition, this can be a festival, anything. So it can be a cultural practice or it can be a physical monument. So all these forms part of heritage. Heritage plays an important role in the culture of a particular community. It also plays an important role in promoting economic development because heritage sites are prominent tourist attractions. So the term cultural heritage has been changed or has changed content considerably in recent decades, partially owing to the instruments developed by UNESCO. So UNESCO has been engaged in promoting culture heritage and they have initiated a number of programs. So they are the organization which designate sites as World Heritage Sites. Similarly, they are also responsible for designating intangible cultural heritage practices. They also designate Creative Cities Network. So that is one more form of culture. So cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collection of objects. It also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. So many people believe that heritage includes just the monuments. So many monuments that have been declared as World Heritage Sites are treated as heritage. But apart from the tangible monuments, there are other aspects of heritage. These include oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. This is what is intangible cultural heritage according to UNESCO. So as I've told you, cultural heritage is classified into two categories. One is tangible cultural heritage and the other is intangible cultural heritage. Tangible cultural heritage is something that can be felt. So something which has a physical appearance. So it includes usually buildings and monuments. So tangible cultural heritage is something which is felt physically and it includes buildings and monuments and objects also. Intangible cultural heritage, on the other hand, includes various oral traditions, knowledge, festivals, etc. etc. So they have defined intangible cultural heritage, the practice, representation, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So this is the definition of intangible cultural heritage. You need not remember this definition because this will not be asked in the mains examination. You just need to remember that intangible cultural heritage is something that cannot be felt physically. It includes a number of oral traditions, cultural practices, festivals, etc. The convention, so there is a convention. This convention was adopted in the year 2003, and the purpose of this convention is to safeguard intangible cultural heritage. So you might have come across a number of news items saying that a cultural practice has died, many people are not following a particular festival. They used to follow this festival in the early times, but now they are no longer practicing the particular ritual or a festival or a custom. So the UNESCO convention for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage is adopted in the year 2003 with the specific intention of protecting the intangible cultural heritage. So what is UNESCO's convention for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage? So this is a convention adopted in 2003. The convention is the international community's first binding multilateral instrument intended to safeguard and raise the profile of intangible cultural heritage. Its goal is to incite countries to care about and look after the intangible cultural heritage present on their territories. So this convention is a multilateral binding instrument adopted in the year 2003. So you need to just remember this convention for the safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. So this convention was adopted in 2003, and the objective of this convention is to protect intangible cultural heritage. So every country has to take the responsibility of protecting intangible cultural heritage on their territory. So, at the national level, state parties are asked to take the necessary measures to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage present on their territory, define and inventory the intangible cultural heritage. This is a very important point. You need to define intangible cultural heritage, and you also must prepare the list of prominent intangible cultural heritage practices in a country. That is what a signatory to this convention must do. So, at the national level, state parties are asked to take necessary measures to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage present on their country, define and inventory the intangible cultural heritage with the participation of the communities concerned, adopt policies and establish institutions to monitor and promote it, encourage research and take the other appropriate safeguarding measures, always with the full consent and participation of the communities concerned. So this is something important. You need to involve the communities in protecting the intangible cultural heritage. Each party must submit regularly reports on the measures taken to protect their intangible cultural heritage 6 years after they ratify the convention. So this is something which is technical in nature, but you need to know that India is a signatory of this convention. India ratified this convention in the year 2005. There are 178 parties to this particular convention. So this is almost universally accepted. So every country has promised to take measures to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage. As part of this convention, UNESCO also identifies what is called the list of prominent intangible cultural heritage practices in every country. This is very, very important. Questions have been asked in the past, so you have to remember this list. So, UNESCO maintains a list of prominent intangible cultural heritage practices in a particular country. So, for India, there is a separate list of intangible cultural heritage practices that are recognized by UNESCO. So, what are these? So, there are 13 practices recognized by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage of India. So, I just have mentioned the names here. So, I also have given brief description. So, you please go through the brief description here. So, Kumbh Mela, I think you all know about Kumbh Mela. Kumbh Mela is the largest peaceful congregation of pilgrims on earth, during which participants bathe or take a dip in a sacred river. So during this occasion, they they bathe or take a dip in the sacred river. Devotees believe that by bathing in the Ganges, one is freed from sins, liberating him or her from the cycle of birth and death. Millions of people reach the place without any invitation. So this event is held once in every 4 years, and it is held at four places: Allahabad, Haridwar, Ujjain, and Nasik. So these are the four places where the Kumbh Mela is held on a rotation basis, and it is attended by millions of people. So like this, I have given a brief description for other intangible cultural heritage also. So just go through this. So I need not elaborate up these practices, but you just have to remember the names. So Kumbh Mela was recognized, I think, in 2017 as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. Then we have Nowruz, which is the Parsi New Year. This is celebrated not just in India but also in several countries of the world. So it is observed in Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, India, Iran, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Then we have traditional brass and copper craft of utensil making among the Tateras of Jandilia Guru, Punjab, India. So this community is involved in making brass and copper craft. They are based in uh, Punjab. So Tateras of Jandiala Guru. Jandiala Guru is the name of the place. So these people are based and they are known for making brass and copper craft. So I have mentioned a brief description about this intangible cultural practice. So just go through this. Then yoga, all of you know about yoga. We need not elaborate on this practice. Yoga has also been recognized as intangible cultural heritage. Sankirtana, so the performance of Sankirtana in the state of Manipur has also been recognized as intangible cultural heritage. In fact, there was a question in the previous papers. So I think this question was asked in 2015. So with reference to Manipuri Sankirtana, consider the following statement. So this is the question which was asked. So they have given three statements on Sankirtana and they have asked whether these are correct or not. These statements are correct or not. So it is a song and dance performance. Yes, it is a song and dance performance which involves a number of people. Cymbals are the only musical instruments that are used in the performance. No, they actually include a number of other instruments also. Cymbals are not just the only instruments. It is performed to narrate the life and deeds of Lord Krishna. So in this case, this is the correct statement. So 1 and 3 are correct. So you need to know something about each and every cultural practice, intangible cultural practice, because they may ask you statements on a particular cultural practice. So you just have to remember each and every prominent intangible cultural practice. Then Buddhist chanting of Ladakh. This is also a very important cultural practice. Recitation of sacred Buddhist texts in the Trans-Himalayan Ladakh region, Jammu and Kashmir, India. Chow dance. This is a famous dance prevalent in eastern India. So it is prevalent in Jharkhand, I think in West Bengal also. So you must know what is Chow and what are the various aspects of Chow dance. Kalbelia is also a prominent folk dance prevalent in the state of Rajasthan. So I have given some description about Kalbelia dance. Just go through this description. You can also find these details in the UNESCO website. So if you are interested in getting additional information on these issues, you can also visit the UNESCO website. They have given detailed description and they also have videos on various intangible cultural practices. So if you have time, please go and visit the site of UNESCO. Then Mudiyattu, this is a ritual theatre and dance drama of Kerala. This is also important. Ramman, ritual theatre and religious festival in the Garhwal Himalayas of Uttarakhand in India. Kudiyattam, it is also a prominent Sanskrit theatre of Kerala. Then Ram Leela. So I'll just wait for a couple of seconds so that you can read this. So Kalbelia, folk dance. This is performed by the Kalbelia community tribe. Kalbelia folk dances. Then we have Mudiyattu. Then we have Ramman. And we have Kutiyattam, Ram Leela. Tradition of Vedic chanting. So the tradition of Vedic chanting, which dates back to as many as 2,500 years. So Vedas were actually written some 5,000 years ago. So tradition of Vedic chanting is also very popular, and it has been recognized as intangible cultural heritage. Then an important development has taken place with respect to intangible cultural heritage very recently. This is very, very important. The Union Ministry of Culture has recently released a draft list of 106 intangible cultural heritage practices of India. So they have identified, as I have told you, whoever ratifies this convention that was adopted in 2003 must prepare an inventory of the intangible cultural heritage. So you must know all these sites. So all these cultural practices, 106 cultural practices have been recognized by the Ministry of Culture as intangible cultural heritage. The national list of, so this is an initiative of the Ministry of Culture under their Vision 2024 program. The National List of Intangible Cultural Heritage of India is an attempt to recognize the diversity of Indian culture embedded in its intangible heritage. So, this is an attempt to recognize the diversity of Indian culture embedded in its intangible heritage. It aims to raise awareness about the various intangible cultural heritage elements from different states of India at national and international level and ensure their protection. So, this is a measure taken by the Ministry of Culture to protect the intangible cultural heritage elements. So, this list is based on the UNESCO's definition of intangible cultural heritage. As I've already told you, it includes your oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, traditional craftsmanship, etc. So, in 2003, uh, this convention was adopted. Now India has prepared this list. I have added the link here, so please go through this link. This is a link which will give you the list of 106 intangible cultural heritage practices. For example, for Andhra Pradesh, they have recognized three intangible cultural heritage practices. Kalamkari, a very prominent art form. It is also a geographical indication. Oggu Katha, a form of folk theatre, which is prevalent in parts of Andhra Pradesh. And Tolu Bommalata. So this is a popular form of shadow puppetry. So all these three cultural practices have been recognized as intangible cultural heritage by the government of India. Similarly, for other states, they have included the intangible cultural heritage practices. I am telling you once again that this is a very, very important topic for your exam. This forms part of your art and culture preparation. So you must know various aspects related to intangible cultural heritage. So you have to follow this topic thoroughly. So I have added the link here for your convenience. So please go through this list. So, in fact, there was a controversy very recently, and this controversy is with respect to a traditional form of medicine that is practiced along the Himalayan region. So, this practice has also been included in the list of intangible cultural heritage, but this particular practice has caused a conflict between India and China. So, if you know the name of the practice, just please mention in the comment section. So it is a practice that is prevalent among the Buddhists, and it is practiced along the Himalayan belt states, that is Sikkim, Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh. And a similar practice prevails in China also. So last year we wanted to include that practice in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage representative list, but China has opposed the inclusion from India of this particular practice. So if you know the name, please mention in the comment box the name of that cultural practice, which in fact has created a controversy. And there has been an initiative. So the government of India has taken a decision to establish a national institution for promotion of that particular practice. So you have to tell me what is the name of that particular practice. So it has been recognized as a part of intangible cultural heritage from the state of Arunachal Pradesh. Though it is prevalent in several states, it has been added to the national list of intangible cultural heritage from the state of Arunachal Pradesh. So if you have been following current affairs over the past 1 year, you might easily answer this question. Then we will move on to the next topic. This is a very important topic for your examination. So developments in the field of space research and defense research will be commonly asked in the civil services prelims as well as the mains exam. So whatever development happens, not just in India but all over the world in the field of space research and defense research is important for your examination. So a prominent development has happened in the field of space research. This development comes from the United States of America. So what is this development and what are the various issues related to this particular development? This is very, very important. So on 31st May, two American astronauts flew to the International Space Station, the world's only space-based laboratory, located at about 400 kilometers from the Earth, in a journey that has been undertaken hundreds of times. So on 31st May, two American astronauts flew to the International Space Station. So this is not the first time that astronauts are going to the International Space Station. So they have taken such journeys several hundreds of times in the past. However, this time this event has generated a lot of excitement because of a very special reason. What is this special reason? The event generated tremendous excitement around the globe, not because of any special technological achievement, but because of the agency that facilitated the trip. So this agency, that is SpaceX, has carried out this trip, and this is for the first time that a private organization has carried out uh, such a trip to the International Space Station. So on 31st May, two astronauts flew to the International Space Station, the world's only space-based laboratory, located at about 400 kilometers from the Earth, in a journey that has been undertaken hundreds of times earlier. The event generated tremendous excitement around the globe, not because of any special technological achievement, but because of the agency that facilitated the trip. The agency here is SpaceX. It was the first time that astronauts used a spaceship built and launched by a private company, and the event is widely seen as the beginning of a new era in space exploration. So this event is seen as a beginning of a new era in space exploration because this is for the first time that astronauts have used a spaceship that is developed by a private company. Two NASA astronauts, Robert Behnken and Douglas Hurley, flew on board a spaceship named Crew Dragon. So you have to remember the name of the spaceship. Crew Dragon is the name of the spaceship. It has been built by SpaceX. So SpaceX is the company, and the name of the spaceship is Crew Dragon. And the name of the mission is commercial. The name of the mission is mentioned here, Demo 2. So commercial crew program Demo 2. This is the name of the mission. So Crew Dragon is the space capsule, SpaceX is the company, and what is the launch vehicle? That is the rocket that is used. So the rocket named Falcon 9 has carried this spaceship to the orbit. So this rocket is Falcon 9. So you have to remember all these three words. So Falcon 9 is the name of the launch vehicle developed by SpaceX. The name of the space capsule is Crew Dragon, and SpaceX is owned by Elon Musk. Elon Musk also happens to be the CEO of Tesla Motors. So that is also a prominent company that produces electric vehicles. So the Commercial Crew Program is a human spaceflight program that is funded by the US government and is administered by NASA, through which private vendors are to develop and operate crew vehicles to carry US and international astronauts to and from the International Space Station. So this is a program. The program is called Commercial Crew Program. This is a program of the US government which is administered by NASA, and under this program, NASA encouraged private vendors to develop and operate vehicles to carry US and international astronauts to and from the International Space Station. So NASA is encouraging private vendors to carry astronauts to and from the International Space Station. This mission named Demo 2 is the second time SpaceX launched its Crew Dragon capsule to the International Space Station. So this is a demonstration mission. So this is the second time that this mission has been launched. This mission was launched last year also, in 2019 this mission was launched, but that was an unmanned mission. But now two astronauts have been on board. So in 2020 they have taken two astronauts to the International Space Station. So this is something which is very important. So developments in the field of space research and defense research are commonly asked in the exam. So you must know the names of various technologies that are developed, the names of various missions, and the objectives of that mission must also be known to you. I also have added something about the International Space Station. So what is the International Space Station? Who owns the International Space Station? And what is the significance of this particular space station? So the International Space Station is a space station in the low Earth orbit. So it is located approximately 400 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. It is a joint program of 5 participating space agencies. This is very important. So the International Space Station is a space station in the low Earth orbit. It is a joint project of 5 participating space agencies. So what are these space agencies? NASA, Roscosmos, which is the space agency of Russia, JAXA, that is the Japanese space agency, European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. The ownership and use of the space station is established by international or intergovernmental treaties and agreements. So the ownership and operations are established by intergovernmental treaties and agreements. The International Space Station serves as a microgravity and space environment research laboratory. So it is like a research laboratory in space, in which crew members conduct experiments in biology, human biology, physics, astronomy, meteorology, and other fields. So scientists conduct a number of experiments in the International Space Station. The station is situated for testing of spacecraft systems and equipment required for missions to the Moon and the Mars. So this also is suited for testing spacecraft systems and equipment required for missions to Moon and the Mars. This is how the International Space Station looks like. So there are various segments within the International Space Station. These segments are owned by different countries. The ISS maintains an orbit at an average altitude of 400 kilometers by means of reboost maneuvers using the engines of Zvezda, Zvezda module or visiting spacecraft. So it actually maintains an altitude of 400 kilometers by reboost maneuvers using the engines of Zvezda module or visiting spacecraft. So it must ensure a particular altitude. It circles the Earth in roughly 92 minutes and completes 15.5 orbits per day. So per day, it completes as many as 15.5 orbits around the Earth. The station is divided into two modules. So there are two sections in the International Space Station. One is the Russian segment, and the other is the United States segment. Russian segment is operated just by the Russians. So Russian orbital segment is owned and operated by Russia, whereas the United States orbital segment is shared by many nations. So it is shared by other countries also. This is very important. The Soyuz is a Russian aircraft, so it is the only vehicle. As on today, Soyuz is the only aircraft that carries people and supplies to and from the space station. The Soyuz can also bring people back to the Earth. At present, only Russian aircraft carrying people to the International Space Station is Soyuz. You have to remember this name, that is the name of the Russian spacecraft. So this is the only operating aircraft or a spacecraft that carries astronauts to and from the International Space Station. Earlier, the Americans used to carry, and they had a program called the Space Shuttle program, but they have discontinued that program. Now, Russian spacecraft is relied by other countries to carry astronauts to and from the International Space Station. So this is about the International Space Station, but this is a very important topic, SpaceX and their achievement in the field of space research in the recent times. Then we will move on to the last topic, that is GDP growth rate. So what do you mean by GDP growth rate? What are the numbers for India in the year 2019-20? So before that, I would like to tell you that India is the fifth largest economy in the world. This is revealed by the International Monetary Fund. So India became the world's fifth largest economy in 2019 in terms of nominal GDP, leapfrogging France and the United Kingdom. So last year in 2018, India was the seventh largest economy in the world, but now we have become the fifth largest economy in the world in nominal GDP terms. In PPP terms, India is the third largest economy in the world. So India's economy now has a nominal GDP of $2.94 trillion. So the value of the Indian economy is said to be $2.94 trillion. The report said India's economy is the fifth largest in the world with a GDP of 2.94 trillion, overtaking UK and France in 2019 to take the fifth spot. So this is about the Indian economy in general. So India is the fifth largest economy according to IMF, and India is the third largest economy in PPP terms, purchasing power parity terms. So, however, the growth rate registered by India has not been that great. In the recent period, we have registered low growth rates, and this has been confirmed very recently, and offering the first glimpse of the extent to which COVID-19 outbreak and subsequent lockdown could impact the economy. The GDP for the January-March quarter grew by 3.1%. So in the fourth quarter of the last financial year, that is financial year 2019-20, the GDP growth rate was just 3.1%. You must know that the financial year in India starts on April 1st and ends on March 31st. These 12 months are divided into 4 quarters. The last quarter begins on January 1st and ends on March 31st. So the last quarter of 2019 and 20 registered a growth rate of 3.1%, and for the financial year 2019 and 20 the growth rate was just 4.2%. the growth rate registered by India was 4.2%. These are provisional estimates, so they are subject to correction in the future. But as of now, according to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, the GDP growth rate of the Indian economy is just 4.2%. So it is the lowest growth rate registered by India in 11 years. So in 11 years, we have not registered such a low growth rate. So this is the lowest growth rate registered in our country. So although GDP growth rates have been declining for the past several quarters, we are not in a recession. So you must remember that we are growing, but we are growing at low rates. We are not registering very high growth rates. We are actually registering low growth rates, but we are growing. Nonetheless, we are actually growing. So, however, there are fears that India will see recession this year. So, this year, because of COVID-19 and various other factors, Indian economy may slip into recession for the first time in several years. So, there is another term which is also used, that is called GVA, gross value added. Gross value added for the financial year 2019 and 20 is 6%. So GDP growth rate is 4.2% and GVA, that is gross value added, is 6% for the financial year. I have given you the formulas here. So GDP is the money value of all final goods and services produced within a country in 1 year. Similarly, GVA has a formula. GVA is equivalent to GDP plus subsidies on products minus taxes on products. So this is a formula. GVA is often being used. It is said to be a very good measure to identify the contribution made by individual sectors. So GVA means GDP plus subsidies on products minus taxes on products. You need to remember this formula. Then what do you mean by recession? So you often hear this term. So there are a number of research organizations who have stated that the Indian economy will be slipping into recession. Then what do you mean by recession? So I have added some points here. So recession, simply put, is when an economy starts to decline in value. So as I have already told you, according to the IMF, the value of the Indian economy is $2.94 trillion. If we register a negative growth rate, that is, if the value of the economy is reduced from 2.94 to 2.8, then the value of the economy has declined. When there is a decline in the value of the economy, then we say that the economy is in recession. So recession, simply put, is when an economy starts to decline in value. It means that the country is producing and earning less than what it did before. So it is actually producing and earning less than what it used to do earlier. This is reflected in the GDP, the overall value of goods and services produced in the country. So GDP values, I mean, it is through GDP numbers that we know whether the country is in recession or not. So recession is said to occur when the economy registers a decline in GDP. So technically, however, an economy would be in recession if its GDP shrinks for 2 consecutive quarters. This is very important. You need to remember this point. Technically, so the definition of recession is if an economy registers a negative growth rate for 2 successive quarters, then you say that the economy is in recession. This decline, so the decline in real GDP is underlined by consumer spending less as they lose confidence in the growth of the economy. So usually it is because consumers spend less. So when consumers spend less, there will be a decrease in demand. So when there is a decrease in demand, there will be a significant reduction in production. When there is a significant reduction in production, there will be a lot of unemployment. So there will be layoffs and there will be a significant hike in unemployment. So recession is extremely bad for the Indian economy. Every year we are adding as many as 1 crore people to the workforce, and we need to provide employment to these people. So recession, however, results in unemployment. It will not generate any employment. It actually results in unemployment. Technically, it is defined as a situation where an economy registers negative growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters. So Indian economy is not in a recession. Indian economy is actually registering a very low growth rate, but we are not in recession. This is a point which you need to remember. Our growth rates are declining, but we are still not in recession. But there are fears that the Indian economy will see recession in this year uh, because of COVID-19. So COVID-19 has brought the economic activity to a grinding halt this year. So you must have known that the government of India has imposed an economic lockdown for as many as 21 days, and this was extended for some more days. and because of this, there was no economic activity whatsoever. So many fear that recession will affect the Indian economy this financial year, that is 2020 and 21. So various estimates are given according to Chrysler, which is a research firm. They say that Indian economy will shrink by 5%. SBI research says that Indian economy will shrink by 6.8%. This is something which you need to know. So how many times has the Indian economy registered a recession in the past 70 years? So since independence, how many times have we registered recession? So there have been four occasions in the past wherein we have registered recession. So 1957-58, 1965-66, 1972-73, and 1979-80. So there have been four occasions in the past where the Indian economy has registered a recession. So for the past 40 years, we have not seen any recession. So for the last 40 years, we have not seen any recession, but we may see recession in this particular financial year. So early recessions were either because of the failure in agriculture or because of the oil price shocks. But this time recession will enter the Indian economy mainly because of COVID-19 and the economic impact of COVID-19. So you need to know a couple of points here. So the GDP growth rate for the financial year, provisional estimates, is 4.2%. This is the lowest growth rate registered in 11 years. GVA, gross value added, is 6.1%. So GVA is GDP plus subsidies on products minus taxes on products. There are fears that recession will affect the Indian economy. Recession is said to occur when an economy registers negative growth rate for 2 quarters. Indian economy has seen recession 4 times in the past, so we may see recession for the fifth time this year. So these are the topics that we have that I have selected for today's class. So in the next class, we will continue with the series of lectures. So if you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. You can call me at this number 767-3939-090. Please use my code RRUPSC for getting an additional 10% discount. And you can follow me at this Telegram channel. So please make a note of this channel. So t.me/Rajasekhara Reddy K. So this is today's class. Thank you so much.